The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and senior editor of Auto Fin Journal and Subprime Auto Finance News. In today's webinar, Maximizing ROI on Auction Purchases, we're going to learn more from Patrick James of vAuto. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you've dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording available to you as soon as possible. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after the presentation for a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time through the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it on to the team at vAuto so they can respond back to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during today's webinar, please click on the hand icon to alert a member of our team. So with plenty of knowledge and recommendations to share, let's get right to Patrick for our webinar. Patrick, the floor is now yours.
Hey, thanks for that intro, Nick. So let's get into it. Clearly, the number one challenge I hear from dealers this year is I can't consistently source cars that I can sell profitably. And Nick, I have a little problem with advancing the slide. Nick, can you give me a little assistance here, please?
Yes, it looks like your notes screen is back up.
Yeah, it's unfortunately yep, there it goes. We're having a little,
there we
froze
go.
up on me. I apologize, folks. Let's try again because it was not advancing. Let's make sure it's going to advance. Now it is. Thank you. All right,
We're
so
good to go.
Let me back up, folks. Yep. So clearly, the number one challenge I hear from dealers this year is I can't consistently source cars that I can sell profitably. So despite predictions of higher supply and lower prices for late model used cars, the prices on the resale market have actually risen this summer. So the most recent price index climbed about 2% for 3-year-old cars at Manheim Auctions. Now, the last time pricing jumped like that on the used car market was last fall after Hurricanes Irma and Harvey. Now, the good news is demand for used cars has increased 3% over last year. But according to analysts, there is no bubble in sight for high auction prices. They're actually predicted to peak fairly soon, but then plateau and not decline again for at least a year. Now, keep in mind, folks, this prediction was made before this past week's devastation caused by Hurricane Florence. So as you can see in this chart, should we expect another blip or rise in wholesale values and auction prices as a result of another hurricane? It's probably a fairly safe bet. So continuing to work with razor-thin margins on auction purchases appears to be the norm going forward, I'm afraid. So vAuto uses a metric called cost to market. Let me take a moment to define this so you can understand the left bar chart on this graphic. Cost to market looks at what you own the vehicle for relative to the average internet price for that vehicle online. Now, the average price is benchmarked at 100%. So if I own my trade-ins on average, as shown above, at the 79% cost to market, I'm going to hope that the market will let me sell it at market average, which is 100%, that I've got a shot at making a 21% margin on my trade-ins. Now, the reason I show you this is based on vAuto user data. This chart shows how auction purchases are typically taken in, much higher than trade-ins. No surprise. But there's actually an immediate loss of about 8% in margin. That's that 87% cost to market on auction units versus that 79% on trade-ins. And note the market day supply, another metric we use in vAuto, of auction units tends to run higher according to the bar chart on the right. So what does this mean? It means the average auction unit tends to be on the market a little bit longer. This creates additional price pressure on an auction unit. In other words, hoping for pricing that auction unit at 100% or average market price in the middle of the pack is less likely to happen and sell with an auction unit. So it's kind of that Econ 101 demand and supply thing that never made a whole lot of sense to me in school. But now this makes a whole lot of sense when you compare an auction units and trade-in profit potential in these charts. So, hey, let's just go get more trade-ins. They're a lot more profitable anyways, right? Well, there's actually a growing trend of customers selling their valuable trade-ins on their own. You know, as a generation of owners comes through that are very comfortable selling just about anything on the web, this shouldn't really surprise us. So this trend makes our ability to rely on trade-ins a lot more challenging. So in my retail career, I dreaded buying cars at auction, I'll be honest with you. And I found myself really willing to sacrifice sales growth and by staying out of the auction to find that additional inventory that we really needed to keep our momentum going. And I've worked with a lot of dealers, and for many dealerships over the past few years, this is kind of a familiar sentiment. But this trend of customers selling their trades on their own tells me that even with the best appraisal process and look-to-book measurement in the market, I have to find a more confident approach to adding to my inventory needs at the auction. So the reality of those that stick their head in the sand, like I did, and don't go to auction is this. On average, 25% of cars are purchased at auction for those dealerships selling new vehicles. Now, I've worked with independent dealers that obviously find the auction to be over 90% of their inventory sourcing. So let's just conclude with all this data that we must find a way to make money on auction units to achieve our future volume and profit objectives. Oh, and if I haven't shown you so far, I really haven't built the case for more efficient auction acquisition, let's look at this trend. According to NADA, the average used vehicle selling price broke the $20,000 mark last year. So let's remember back to the chart I showed you, that cost to market information. And remember, we own our trades at about, according to the vAuto data, at 79% cost to market. And we own our auction units at 87%. So again, if I can sell my cars at market average, I can make a nice 21% margin on my trade-ins and a 13% margin on my auction units when I put them on the internet, assuming that I can sell them without discounting. Well, this data says on average, we are actually selling trade-ins and auction units alike with less than a 12% margin when we actually retail them. 11.7 to be exact in 2017. So I wanted to show you, because this is a lot of buzz in the industry right now, this really sums up that margin compression trend that we hear so often about. And that $20,000 average selling price, well, when I work with dealers and I would run a sales history report to look at like the average markup of the units they sold, you know, they usually call me Captain Obvious when I said, wow, look at this, your lower priced cars sold faster with more gross. They know that. The problem is the market is saying, it's given us evidence here that it's pushing us in a different direction. With cars with an average selling price breaking 20,000 and growing, this is going to put us in a different place, certainly not by choice. So who am I to tell you how to buy cars? I was that retail guy that tried to stay out of the auction because it was so intimidating. Well, as a vAuto performance manager over the past 3.5 years, I've been working with 40 to 50 different dealers a week, large and small, on their biggest challenges in the used car operations. I eventually saw myself simply as a pirate, pillaging what worked and what didn't work. Now, I saw myself as Johnny Depp, the pirate. My wife saw me really more like this guy after a 30-year career. But in my online and on-site meetings, I always asked, what are your biggest challenges to the dealer? By far, the most common answer was vehicle acquisition. So knowing my comfort zone, we would dig into the appraisal process. We would dig into the store's trade capture rate and look to book as we measure it in vAuto. You know, after all, according to the chart I had up earlier, 65% of a franchise dealer's vehicle acquisition comes from those trade-ins. So we got to be really good at that. But after thoroughly exhausting every best practice I had up my sleeve, pirated from car folks much smarter than I am, I would still have to eventually ask, so what is your strategy to acquire the other 25% or more of your inventory that you must get at auction to keep this machine running? The answer, Larry. So I would then ask, how does Larry then decide what cars to look for as he goes to auction? The answer, well, he takes his trusty VIN scanner and looks for the cars we need. He's been doing this for a long time, and he's really good at it. So the problem I find with Larry's strategy is Larry is spending most of his auction sourcing time looking for cars that work, but walking the same pavement that he's been walking for years. And if those core inventory units are not at the sale that week, or they are going, and I quote, through the roof, he may come back driving that same wholesale piece he meant to leave at the sale. So then the pressure mounts, right? And we have to buy cars this week. So because Larry is forced to deliver, he may have to ignore his instincts that made him a great buyer and buy something, anything. And he's got to buy a big chunk of units all at once. That leads to bottlenecks in the shop and in detail, and the result destroys our ability to achieve speed to market. So as a performance manager working directly with hundreds of clients over the years, I have run this report, and it's a bit of an eye chart, but it's extremely useful. I've run this report looking at dealers past 60 days of sales 1,000 times or more. This is the typical result here. Notice, and this is actually a very high-performing dealer adhering to the velocity sales model, but notice in the red, in the summary of sales across the top, they only had 14 units that they retailed over 60 days old. Pretty good job. However, like most dealers, they use a stock number nomenclature, right, to easily identify auction purchases. And I would do this analysis time again with dealers, and I would highlight those P stock numbers. In this case, they used the P in front of the stock number to say it was a purchase unit. And I would highlight those vehicles in yellow down in the list of sold units in the body of the report, and we would take a deeper look at those cars. And time again, of the units that were sold over 60 days old, in the red, by the way, those are the ones that made it to the age, and that red column to the right, many of them were auction units, and they did not deliver any gross. In fact, if you look at the markup column to the far right, you'll see a lot of negative numbers. Matter of fact, all of them are negative numbers in this particular dealer's report. They were all losers in order to move them at this stage of their life cycle. I will recommend, if you haven't looked at an analysis of your sales like this in some time, do it. It will really expose some actionable opportunities. So let me be clear. Larry is not the problem. There are thousands of Larrys in the car business that could run circles around me and many of us in buying cars at auction. And they've mastered the art of buying cars that are available at the auctions that they frequent. So my challenge to you, given all these new, and I will say new, external factors attacking our business, is Larry needs some help. We need a playbook for success, and Larry is likely going to be the captain. but we must leverage all the car talent in the dealership to make some decisions. You see, if the typical dealer has about $1 million of used cars in inventory, and 25% of those come from auction, Larry is walking into a sale each month with a checkbook containing about a balance of about $250,000. Now, I've worked for a few large companies in my career, and I never saw any one person that it could approve a $250,000 expenditure without a few meetings and a well-defined business plan. And Larry's making this decision month in and month out. So, what can we do to ensure your wholesale sourcing efforts start to bring home the most profitable producing vehicles with less upfront time and effort? I strongly recommend, first, you spend more time determining the cars you can sell in your market and at your dealership. Use local market data and your sales history to drive some collaboration and buy-in from your management team. I have found this to be the key to less finger pointing and a better strategy. If we could take the time that we spend trying to find those cars at the auction and put that into a collaborative strategy to find the cars that really we could do better with, that is going to be the real advantage. Take the time to find the used car segments and price bands that work best in your market. So where can you find this data? I've got some charts up on the screen here. vAuto is a great source for user-friendly used vehicle market data. That's what we do, that your team can review weekly and help build your playbook. If you don't have vAuto software, you can use local registration reports, cross-sell reports. There's a myriad of information that you can pull and start to assemble this information. But in this example above, this is how that session may start. So take a look at the top bar chart. The market sales are represented by the orange line. Note the gap between the market sales and the dealer's inventory represented by the blue bar. This is over that $15,000 to $20,000 price point. And the dealer's actual sales are represented by the light blue shaded area. So essentially, you can say that the dealer is selling what they stock in that price point. But the gap is the market is doing a lot better moving units through that $15,000 to $20,000 price point. So we can start there. Put together a plan by vehicle segment, best-selling model years, and even makes to close the gap. We need a well-thought-out plan to have a better selection on the lot to take advantage of the market sales in this lucrative price segment in this particular example. Give Larry the strategy and the game plan to go find those cars. Now, this is a strategy page out of vAuto showing where you need inventory by segment and price band and where you don't. The real simple thing to read gives you, I need pluses and minuses. This is a great place to have a weekly acquisition meeting to identify immediate needs led by Larry so he can dial in on a plan before he starts his pre-sale auction work each week and attempt to fill those holes and those gaps just from your market sales. Now, back to my pirating ways here. This is a version of a playbook that many dealers use to forecast the month's sales. So what they do is they land on a 30 or 45-day stocking plan. And they put in a sales forecast. And this spreadsheet, and again, I'm a pirate here, right? I see these great ideas that are produced, and we take advantage of them. It allows them to put a 30 or 45-day stocking plan and let the local market share by vehicle segment direct where the opportunity lies. So no more telling Larry, hey, just buy some cars we can retail for under $13,000, right? We're going to match the market opportunity so Larry can fill the holes to make sure we have enough units by market segment each month in order to keep our sales forecast intact, achieve it, and beyond. So you now may be asking, how is Larry going to find the time to put together a playbook, right? When he has to comb through hundreds of units a week at the auction and find the cars that really are going to be able to fulfill this game plan if we sit down and put a strategy together. So that's where technology comes in. Number one, we need to build a business plan that will screen every unit, automating the spread between where you need to retail the car and where the possible wholesale transaction price may land. Technology can do that for you. As a first pass, you can eliminate those cars that will not fit your plan. Spend more time digging into the cars that have the best potential for profit. 2, it's time to cast a wider net. With the assurances auction houses are putting in place to buy online, why do you care where the car comes from? As long as the financials, including transportation and reconditioning expense, make sense to put the car on your lot. Through technology, use a platform that brings all the data you need to make a solid and speedy decision on whether it's a car that will fit in your playbook. Customize that information that is important to you and how you like to buy cars. This will put you in a much more efficient place when you're doing all that pre-sale work instead of getting to the auction and only being able to see a portion of the cars in a reactionary mode. For example, if you need subprime cars, then set up a separate business plan using technology to search and find those units that book out well against NADA values. There's several different approaches you can take to find the types of vehicles that you need to put on your lot depending on what your demographic is and what your strategy is for selling used cars. Time and time again, number 3, clients that use this new technology finally begin to gain confidence to buy online and spend less time physically at auction. And the time they save and the time Larry saves doing more efficient pre-sale work becomes a real game changer. So spending less time rifling through cars to find the winners means Larry can focus more on appraising trades, managing his inventory, with more effective merchandising on your online listings, et cetera, et cetera. So what if Larry could create an ongoing search across all the auctions of your choice for a vehicle that your game plan says you need a number of them every week to be flowing in? That bread and butter unit that you have to have. What if you check that search every few days and it would only show you the fresh units that came into the wholesale market since the last time you opened the search? Larry saves valuable time avoiding the units that were already ruled out and are still recycling at the auctions. More time to do other things to add value to the dealership, more time to put a better strategy together of the cars that you're really needing and collaborate with your talented management team. Larry can have fewer trips home from the sale or spending hours shopping online to say, I just couldn't buy anything. The prices were through the roof. So we must find ways to find cars at auction. So even if we have to pay more than we're comfortable, the time and energy creating a playbook with the input of the best minds in your dealership will reduce the risk of making those big mistakes at the block. So take it from some dealers that have experienced the benefit of the strategy, shifting this time into more planning and less time searching for cars. You can go to vAuto.com and click on the success stories section. Hear from them verbatim. Personally, this is my favorite because this was a client of mine, and he posted this on LinkedIn, unsolicited. And I think Craig really said it best. Says, this new technology will feed you cars like a vending machine. So I hope our time here established the need to dig deeper into your auction acquisition strategy and put your playbook together for the first time, or at least dust off the old one and make it a weekly reference in your management meetings. Just remember, I'm simply sharing what I see happening at the stores that have made a conscious effort to spend more time as a team studying their market and analyzing what sells profitably on their lot. Creating that playbook is critical, but while allowing technology to reduce the time you traditionally spend trying to execute on their game plan at the sale. So Nick, that should open us up for some questions.
Very good. Excellent presentation. And if you have questions for Patrick James, who is the Director of Stockwave Business Development at vAuto, please be sure to use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And just as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar, so please keep watch of your inbox for a link to the recording to review the great information that Patrick has shared already and distributed around the team at your store, so you could dust off or sharpen that playbook as Patrick described. And to get the conversation started, Patrick, opening question that's come in, a dealer has acknowledged that he's not a guru at Excel, but certainly wants the information is very helpful to have when making decisions. Just what suggestions would you have as how to get access to that information in a user-friendly report? So we talked about technology. By now you figured out that technology is Stockwave, right? So hey, I'm not ashamed of it. But so like vAuto, vAuto software comes with a performance manager of the role that I played for the last 3.5 years. And, you know, we're required to have retail experience with extensive understanding of the software, the metrics, and the best practices. Stockwave also comes with a performance consultant. So this is a person who's been in the retail environment with an extensive experience of buying at the auction. So this is your consultant, if you will, that can provide you with some of these tools. And that particular spreadsheet that I throwed up there where they were working with the dealer and actually forecasting their sales and trying to predict which segments they should go and build their playbook against, so to speak, that's the type of information that the performance consultant helps you with. And they're probably a little slicker at Excel than the average guy, I'm going to guess, the average guy or gal. The voice you're hearing, that's Patrick James, who is the Director of Stockwave Business Development at vAuto. And our webinar today, Maximizing ROI on Auction Purchases. And you mentioned it toward the beginning of your presentation. Certainly, the Carolinas are still assessing the impact of damage from Hurricane Florence that went through this past weekend. What are your sources telling you at Cox Automotive of what the early estimates might be as far as how that storm might impact the wholesale markets, not only in the Southeast, but perhaps beyond?
Yeah, I don't have any predictions in terms of numbers. Can't probably quantify it at this point, but I think I purposely grabbed that graphic that did a pretty good job of showing the spikes that we had from the past hurricane activity. And one thing that's, you know, we tend to know is that history will repeat itself. And so I feel like we're going to get an uptick. I mean, if you saw the industry predictions said that we haven't really even peaked yet for auction prices, that it was going to peak soon, then plateau, and then kind of stay there for a whole year. Well, now we throw in a situation of a natural disaster that we know has an impact on this pricing and values before. So I can only believe that we're probably going to get another, continuous uphill tick here, which may put us out a little longer than where that plateau was expected to kind of flatten out, if you will. So definitely going to be battling that and the auction prices. And again, that's the biggest, feedback that I hear from dealers is, where's the bubble? When's this going to stop? And we just don't see a lot of that in all the predictions and all the analysts' data that we get.
Very good. The voice you're hearing, that's Patrick James, who is the Director of Business Development for Stockwave at vAuto. And again, in your presentation, you referenced the cost to market calculation, and a dealer question has come in asking for some clarity on that. Is that calculation of 87% based on no pass? If you could revisit how you arrived at those figures in that particular calculation.
Yeah, so that was just a compilation of vAuto users. Obviously, we have access to that data, and what we find, and that's a snapshot in time, but it is basically showing that, and this is not unusual when you're having a conversation with a dealer and they look at their cost to market. Where do they own their auction vehicles relative to, where they can price them retail wise? And it's not unusual for them to own those cars several points higher. I have, my working with dealers, had them look at me and say, I'm buying cars at auction, and by the time I get them into my inventory, I own them for 92, 93, 94% cost to market. And if you're telling me that I have a really aggressive market, I don't think I can demand market average on the internet for my price, which would be 100%, right? That put me in the middle of the pack. If I have to price my cars below market, say 98, 97, and day one I own them for 92 or 93, that's the margin compression that everyone is talking about, and it's razor thin. So we got to be very calculated and very strategic in the units that we bring in, because we want a lot more winners than losers when we're going to auction.
Again, our special guest for today's webinar, the voice you're hearing, that's Patrick James, who is the Director of Business Development for Stockwave at vAuto, and his contact information is there on the screen. If you or your teammates at your store have questions, you can certainly reach out to him directly, or during our time together today, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And as just a reminder, we are recording today's session, so please watch your inbox for a link to the recording to revisit some of the information that Patrick has already shared and disseminated around your store to sharpen that playbook to maximize the ROI on auction purchases. Patrick, another element of point that you made during your presentation, could you elaborate a little bit more about how dealers can find registration data for vehicles that are being transacted in their markets? What technology is out there? How can they find the information that they need?
Well, I'm a little biased because at vAuto, we've worked long and hard to try to put that sort of data together in a usable format. And if they're a vAuto client, that information is available through their strategy page. Through the provisioning module is where they'll find it. Some dealers have that module and some don't. But that's some of the graphs that I alluded to earlier that we showed up there. Beyond that, and I'll go back, my early career in retail, we used to just grab the registration data, and I'll be honest with you, there's going to be some legwork that has to be done. You're going to have to find that guy in your dealership that's really good at Excel. You just don't know you hired him. And you're going to have to put together some of that data and put some energy into putting that into a usable format. I really believe that's critical to be able to do it. I know a lot of the larger dealer groups have, internal departments that are providing this type of information to be able to see where the opportunity lies in their market. Obviously, OEMs provide that on the new car front in many cases, but really to get that used car data, it's important to find that, because I think that's what makes the best decisions if you're sitting down and putting together this playbook. I don't know of any other way to do it unless you're looking at, one, your own sales, and then you're looking at the market data and what segments are driving your sales, which price points are selling the best. It's all part of this new strategy. And if you don't have access to that data, I really believe some way, somehow you have to do that, because, going by your gut is what I find in working with dealers is not been as effective as they continue to see, these auction prices rise, and they see significant shifting right into truck and SUV in the market. So there's a lot of dynamics going on that you really got to get a feel for in order to put together a good inventory plan for used cars.
Again, our special guest expert for today's webinar, Maximizing ROI on Auction Purchases, is Patrick James, who is the Director of Business Development for Stockwave at vAuto. And just to continue our conversation here, closing moments, and if you have a question for Patrick, please use the chat function, questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel, or his direct contact information is there on the screen. And perhaps a way to close our time together, Patrick, is you emphasized throughout the presentation about how much technology is a key to being successful as margins are compressed. What might be your suggestions as far as what might be one or two of the most important features that a dealer should be considering when looking at a piece of technology to incorporate into their auction buying? What are some key elements that the tool has to have in order to be successful, in your opinion?
So I think that the first thing that comes to mind is, one, I mentioned this in the presentation about profit spread, right? Spread between where I think I can buy that car and really what the retail market will bear for that particular vehicle. If technology can help me filter through cars and kind of eliminate the ones that just don't work for me in that scenario, that just allows me to look at a lot fewer cars as I'm doing my pre-sale work. But then again, I've ruled out a lot of cars that normally I would spend no time looking at. So it kind of makes me feel a little bit more confident that I'm really starting to filter down and look at the cars that really where the opportunity is. Now, I'm going to tell you with spread, in Stockwave, we build a business plan in order to address this. And we interview the client, and we talk about, what's your reconditioning, average reconditioning? There's tons of elements that go into calculating that spread. And I will tell you, there's no perfect science to say it's going to automatically, do an appraisal on this car. It is a first pass in order to eliminate, really what I consider the outliers and get to those cars where the profit opportunity is. And then secondly, we're going to go in and we're going to start to filter out cars that are really kind of customized to my buying practices. So maybe I would never buy a car that has a bad Carfax. Not interested, doesn't work in my market. So I'm going to filter it out based on that, based on the condition. Maybe it's a condition report. I never buy a car that's less than a 3.5 condition report. Market day supply, I focus very heavily on that. I don't want to buy a car that's less than 60 market day supply. These are all things that really kind of fit your local strategy and how you like to buy cars and what works best for you. And I want technology, again, to put another layer of filters onto that universe so that I can get to the cars that I'm really mostly focused on and what I know work for my dealership. And that's, if I can get technology to do a lot of that legwork for me, that's a huge time savings. And then I can dig into cars that I think really might work, and I can feel more confident going back to my colleagues saying that, we got this dialed in about as tight as you can, given all the information that's available today to make good decisions.
Closing moments here with our expert for our webinar, Maximizing ROI on Auction Purchases. That's Patrick James, who is the Director of Business Development at Stockwave with vAuto. And perhaps, and again, Patrick's contact information is there on the screen, and keep watch of your inbox for a recording of today's webinar to share and review the material that Patrick has explained during our time together today. And Patrick, perhaps a way to close out our session today is just how quickly can stores make a change to their playbook, and how soon would be a recommendation of how quickly results can be measured as far as improvements and perhaps maybe further changes need to be made. Any other thoughts you'd like to close this out?
All right. Well, I appreciate the softball, Nick, because I'm going to go into my Stockwave spiel here, right? So, again, with Stockwave, you've got a performance consultant that helps you with the technology. And that's a critical piece to the success of being able to use this technology. This is someone who's bought cars before, understands the market, but more importantly, understands this technology inside and out. And they're there to really help you navigate through and set up your business plan and help you with that playbook that you can go to the rest of your colleagues and put together, really tight strategy on how you want to go to market. And I truly believe that through their consultation and the assistance that they can provide with this technology, you can really change the way you've probably been looking at buying cars at auction. And I can just tell you, I've personally seen this. I worked closely with an independent dealer that went to 2 auctions a week, like clockwork, and called me up after getting on Stockwave, and this was a prior vAuto client, and added the Stockwave module and said, you know what, and I know this sounds, a little over the top, but he said, you've actually changed my life because now I have the confidence. I put a couple of screens in my back office, and I never would have bought online before, because he buys some lower price, kind of some edgy product. He's got his own very comprehensive reconditioning process that he does. And so he really wanted to touch those cars and thought he would never get out of the auction physically. But now, through Stockwave, because of the confidence of looking at the data and refining things, he's now buying mostly on simulcast and online and bringing those units in. And it's freed him up as a business owner to do so many other things and to be at his store where he'd rather be and still be able to make those acquisition decisions. And he feels like it's given him the confidence to be able to do that. So I think those are some of the stories we have out there that has really changed the way some dealers are buying cars to the good.
That's Patrick James, Director of Business Development for Stockwave at vAuto. Patrick, thank you so much for the great information and being a part of today's webinar.
Thank you.
And for all of us at Cherokee Media Group, I'm Nick Zulovich. Thank you so very much for joining us.